Hi and welcome to Eldar Army. This week's review, as you can see, is for the Banshees. Banshees have been part of 40k for a very long time. They were part of the reimagining by Jez Goodwin in White Dwarf 124, 127. They were, for some editions, I think the second and third edition, one of the strongest aspects. With the advent of the 6th edition, they became very, very, very much sort of nerfed through the rules, mostly with their power weapons being now AP3 only. They have probably become the second worst aspect in the Codex. This is a review for people who've got the models and want to try to use them in a kind of value way. I'm not going to lie to you, then they're quite hard to get to work. Even if you work very hard to get them to work, they will struggle to work. So whereas most Eldar units, if you use them in the right way, will work and give you a payback, these are one of the few units in the Codex that if you use them in the right way, they still may not even give you the payback. And for that reason they are, and also they've got the fragility, so for that reason they are very, very difficult to work with to an extreme. Even in fun lists, I think they're a risk. But let's go into them first of all, as usual, with the history of the model. Well, welcome to the history of the model. As you can see, the first ever model for the Banshee, which came out in about 1991, is actually carrying a las pistol. Originally they were completely strength 3. Well, that's still true, but it's kind of hard to go into. But back then, pistols could count as a strength weapon. So they had a strength 3 pistol. So the las pistol was a very weak weapon by any standards, but it did give them a close combat attack. So they were pure close combat specialists. However, they had a power weapon, which basically didn't allow or afford any saves really on the defending unit. So they had a very, very, very weak shooting attack. They had a Banshee mask, which I think caused fear back then, and they also had a sword that was well capable of doing the damage. They were specialist marine killers, really, heavy armour killers. The model, as you can see, is metal. It's very fragile. It's probably the most fragile Eldar model I've ever owned. The proof of that is this little lady here who lost her sword, and this one which lost her sword. They're not even in the box anymore. These three, they were mine when I was a kid, so I've owned them all that time. They've been in a box. I painted the original ones that I bought blue, not very successfully, and I have not stripped them. I won't irritate you by showing you them. I was probably about 14 when I painted them, maybe 15. But these girls are, they're of their time. The model that was then changed to a model that I don't have. In the 2nd edition, there was a release. I think it was around 1999, and that release was done. I don't actually have that model, but I'll show you a picture of it. But basically, it's got a lot more hair and a bit of a wider mask. Then they went, and I don't think it looks hugely attractive. They're the ones that you see, I think, in the Dawn of War game. It was slightly different, sort of more wider facial mask. And then in 2004, I believe, they came out with this new line of models, which are metal, which are really, really good. I mean, they're really attractive. They went back to the original form. They got the shuriken pistol, which was added in the 2nd edition, to give them a bit more punch in shooting. It's not excellent, but it's better than las pistol. I think they're the only aspect to actually change their weapon loadout in their lifetime. I believe that's true. Every other aspect has not changed its weapons loadout, although the Exarchs may have done. But the original units have never changed their, but actually Banshees have. It's a bit of trivia there. So we've gone through the the model, the history of the model. It's now currently only available not in metal but in that resin, fine cast. I'm not a big fan of fine cast. I've never bought it, but even with this setup here, they're very fragile. When I take them anywhere in a box, I will come back and expect 3 or 4 swords to be split off. They also take an absolute age to glue, and for some reason that I don't quite understand, they're really hard to pin. The joints are too small, and I don't have a pin drill that will stay still and drill that tiny point without demolishing the limb. I have managed to drill the Jane's R, but it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in modelling. But anyway, now we'll go through the pros and cons of the Banshees. So, what are the pros and cons of the Eldar Banshee? Well, pros, they're immune to Overwatch, which is pretty good. They get power weapons, and for the points, that's cheap, very cheap actually. You can, for 85 points, you can get 5 power weapons. You know, you can't do that in Marines. So you think, oh, what is there not to like? You've got, it ignores Overwatch. They've also got a +3 to their run. They uncharge. They ignore Overwatch, and they carry power weapons and they're cheap. And you think, well, blooming heck, they should be in every game, right? But their deficiencies are huge. Probably the worst one is that Eldar lack an assault transport. So unless you're prepared to ally, you're not going to get an assault transport. Even if you do ally with the current FAQ, you can't start embarked. You have to embark in the game. And so they lack an effective means of getting into combat in a game such as 7th edition, where close combat is hard to do. So the game is much more skewed towards shooting in the current instance. So close combat is already nerfed. Then you have no way of getting them safely into combat at all, none. And so with toughness 3 and a 4 up armor save, pretty much everything obliterates them. I think I calculated that if a squad of 10 Marines with bolters, rapid fires at 10 Banshees, there'll be like 1 left. You know, I mean, they are absolutely so easy to kill. They're not even Imperial. They're like Imperial Guardsmen, and they don't have a gun, so they have to close. Well, they do have a gun, but it's a pistol of no real strength, and no real. You know, it might get 1 or 2 wounds if you're lucky, type thing. So while you think, oh, they lack Overwatch, I can do some shenanigans. You can't really take small squads, although one of my builds does, and the cons are sort of environmental in terms of the codex and specific in terms of the Eldar codex, and those two things represent a obstacle that is so large that their profile abilities, which are actually very good, you would normally say the only thing wrong with them really is lack of strength, you know, if you had an assault transport, but that no longer is it's like that's small beer compared to the 2 massive great big elephants in the room, which is melee is nerfed and Eldar can't get into combat. So the pros and the cons are pretty much all cons. I think the pros are that they're cheap and they carry power weapons and they deny Overwatch and they can run fast. They're all quite good actually in themselves, but they don't mitigate at all the cons, because they won't get into combat unless the guy who you're facing is already beaten. And that's one of the things that we're going to go through. So what are the builds that we can use for these girls? Well, I'll go through them. I've done 3 builds, 2 static builds. One of them is actually an allied build, which I just can't get away from, which is a shame because I don't like doing allied builds, except maybe as bonus builds. But the bonus build is a very odd one, in the sense of how you use it is tactically quite unusual. And this is, like I say, a codex for people who've got Banshees and want to use. This is a video for people who've got Banshees and want to use them. And if you're in that place and you want to get squeeze as much value out of them as possible, I'll go through the 3 builds. And the first build is coming up now. So, welcome to build 1. And it revolves around this young lady here, Jane's R. Jane's R, I think, has got 10 abilities to her name. She's quite a hard character to actually get familiar with, but I'll summarise it in broadly the simplest terms. With Jane Zar and 10 Banshees, you've got a squad which is probably the most effective way that Eldar within the current codex can field. That is on foot. It's on foot. You start them on the board, you start them as near as possible, and you run 11 miniatures in a squad up the table. You potentially tank with Jane Zar and put her at the front, and then look out, sir, any big sort of AP2 hits. And you also use her to tank, but if you turn a corner and there's like a Lehman Russ or something, then you might put her in the middle. But she probably will survive. She might lose a couple of wounds, but she should get into combat. So what you want to do is try and get... You see, Banshees lack a strength attack, which is a significant problem. So their strength 3 attacks are just not good enough. So they have to make up for that with weight of attacks, which means they have to be deployed in large numbers. And in order to be effective, they need to be in combat. So the two things you need to do to this squad to increase its combat effectiveness is ally with Jane's arm, and we'll go through what she gives in a minute. And also make sure the Exarch has the Executioner. That's strength 5, AP2. So she loses an attack, because she only gets 3 attacks on the charge, but she still gets 2 attacks every round of combat, and it's strength 5, AP2. So you can mitigate the strength there. How do you get these into combat? You use Jane Zar, and the fact that they all now have a 3-inch run. If you make Jane Zar the Warlord, she also gets the Warlord trait that gives her a 3-inch run. So I think it's called Falcon's Swiftness. So she now has effectively given this squad, if you take it as part of a battle host, for example, a jet bike battle host, Wind Rider I think it's called, then they all get a 6-inch run. And if you take these girls as an aspect host, then they could be weapon skill 5, and I would go for weapon skill 5. I would not try to give them ballistic skill 5. So you can, by taking them in formations and taking them as part of a Wind Rider battle host, you can now get these girls into 18-inch movement a turn, which is enough to secure combat in turn 2 against an army that is not going to follow and come to you. And it is enough to get into combat in turn 1 if you go second and they want to come to you. Now that's important to bear in mind. Not all armies don't want to get near you. And while 80% of them don't want to get near you, not all of them don't want to get near you. A great example would be maybe Grey Knights, or another one would be just Marines in drop pods, pod. They want to get near you. And so with careful placement, though they don't get 6 inches added to the charge, they only get 3 inches added to the charge, which is the acrobatic. They do ignore Overwatch. Anything you can do to secure these girls all arriving in combat, you must do it, because with the poor strength and the relatively, that's 30 attacks, but they might hit with weapon skill 5. They might hit on 3s if you're lucky. They might hit on 4s, but they're going to hit on 3 or 4s, which isn't bad. They're then going to have wound on 5s, and wounding on 5s, it's hard. It's hard. Wounding on 4s is literally, it's the difference between half a chance of hurting someone and a third of the chance of hurting someone, and it's quite a big difference. So it's like having a third more men, if you know what I mean, by having 1 more strength point. Now, there are ways of getting extra strength. You can try to go for Hammer Hand. By the way, if you can get Hammer Hand and you've got a Psyker and you want to put it in this squad, it will make a massive difference. A massive difference. If you can get Hammer Hand, you completely change this squad. But I've looked closely at the numbers and getting psychic support to get them Hammer Hand, and also invisibility. If you can get Hammer Hand and invisibility, this squad has suddenly become one of the most powerful squads in 40k. But you can't do anything to guarantee that. And in all honesty, you're not going to get it unless you do tons of point spends. But if bizarre things happen and you have a Seer Council that you were going to put in a Falcon or something, and then that Seer Council manages to get invisibility and Hammerhand, and you think, oh, I'm going to put them in there now, that kind of works. I'd take the time getting into combat then, you know, if you had that, because then you're talking strength 5 attacks, strength 7 from her, she's suddenly strength 6. They are absolutely disgustingly good now, because their strength is such a big weakness and their fragility is such a big weakness that if you can actually take them off the table and remove through invisibility and remove through hammer hand and things like that. There is another way of getting a buff where you can get an avatar. He gives you a 12-inch buff. I've actually used that once in a game. It's tough. It's tough to pull off because they just plink off the avatar. If you can get it to work, it's actually amazing, because you're mitigating their strength. But in reality, it's a lot of points, because she's like 200 points. This is quite a lot of points. I think it's something like, it's talking 300 and I think it's pretty close to 200 points. So you're talking like 400 points here, which is a lot of points. And then Avatar as well is like 600 points. It's seriously not worth that kind of investment. But if you're in a big apocalypse game or something like that, they can be really, really good. And my gut feeling is that if you can focus your tactics on trying not to get them shot, try not to get them, try to give them some sort of, maybe not a strength buff, but attacks, mitigating, extra attacks, so you get loads of them to try and mitigate the fact they haven't got any strength. If you can do that, then you will actually cause a large amount of wounds. And the way to try to do that is to try and use her to tank. When I have done this, I did it against Imperial Guard that was so castled up at the back, and I didn't use the Wind Rider host, so I didn't have the 6-inch auto run. But they were castled up so far at the back, it actually took me till turn 3. They had 2 rounds of shooting that they got shot at, including I think 30 Imperial Guardsmen, las guns, and I think first rank, second rank fire and orders and stuff like that. And I only got 2 Banshees plus the Exile plus the Jane Czar Phoenix Lord into combat, and they did really, really well. They did really, really well. So that even if you can only get if they get shot, you're losing 7 of them. And don't get upset. Don't get disheartened. Unfortunately, that's the price you pay for not having a transport. They're still going to run very fast. If she's your warlord, you're going to get an 18-inch first turn move, plus the second turn you're going to get a 9 plus the 2d6 charge, which is re-rollable. So you're going to get a massive move off these girls. Use it. Numbers counts, because you're not. Yes, you've got maybe a good weapon skill, but you haven't got in. You haven't. I mean, good weapon skill is not brilliant. Weapon skill is probably the weakest stat in a way, because attacks is just so much more important than weapon skill, in my opinion. So, which is a wrong imbalance. So attacks they don't really have. They've got 3 on a charge. It's all right. 30 attacks on a charge, plus Jane's R is all right. It's all right. It should be brilliant, but it's just all right. Okay, so remember that. But yeah, like I say, they don't get Overwatch, and if you want to pair them up with things like Wraith Blades, you can do a trick where you put Wraith Blades and Jane's R together. You put them in front, put the Banshees behind, etc., etc., etc. Use the Banshees to do the initial charge, and then the Wraith Blades. But they're still expensive. Even that tactically is very expensive. So overall, I think good in terms of the best of a bad situation. But I would still only give them a 2 out of 5. This is definitely a D in terms of its effectiveness in the game. So let's go on to build 2. So build 2, what are we going to do to make this situation even remotely usable in terms of the Banshees and their deficiencies? Yeah, we want to maximise their strengths, of which they have some very good ones, but we want to mitigate their weaknesses. Well, there's one ticket out of there, and it's an easy button. It's an I win button for Banshees, and I suggest if you've got, say, 2 squads of 20, 10 each and you want to use them, you've got no choice. You have to ally with Dark Eldar. Now, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to ally with Dark Eldar. It's not in my nature. But if you're somebody who's got Dark Eldar and you're prepared to play a bit of ally, then you need to put them in raiders. If you can get 10 of these girls into raiders, they are cheap. You know, raiders 55 points. A squad of just 10 without an Exarch is, I think it's 170 points. For less than 250 points, you are going to have a transport that will jink up the table. If you give it night shields, it's definitely not going to get hurt. You're definitely going to get into combat on turn 2, and they're going to assault and quite obscene distance, probably about 15 inches or more. And you know, from the transport, they're going to sort of unload, then charge, and they get to shoot, they get to charge plus D3. They're all going to get into combat because there's no Overwatch opportunity against them. You're going to get them all into combat. If you mix that up with another raider full of another Banshees or another raider full of Wraithblades as well, including Jane Czar and the Wraithblades, because you get an extra sort of bit of movement off that. But even then, I mean, it's a exceptionally good assault. It turns Eldar from an unassaulting army into possibly one of the better assaulting armies in the game, just because the transports jink. And you know, orcs would give their left nut for a transport that would jink, you know. And Dark Eldar get ones that are cheap. They get 3 hull points. Yeah, of course it's open top, it's going to get obliterated. But you're gonna ram it up the table and jink, aren't you? That's what you're gonna do. And even if it gets shot out of the sky, which is unlikely, but even if it gets shot out of the sky on turn 1, they're gonna be further up the table, they're gonna be on foot, and they're gonna plow up and do quite well. So, you know, in an explosion, strength 4 is quite nasty to them, but they do have 4 up save, it's not bad. And they should survive. And then you've got to get up the table. So quite honestly, if you just took these without an Exarch even, I think it's a good opportunity. If you take them as part of a battle host, which I think you need to, you've got weapon skill 4, immune to shooting, and you're guaranteeing getting 10 into an assault, which mitigates the strength 3. So it mitigates the survivability because now they're in combat, and it mitigates the strength 3. The Banshees actually do quite well in combats that last multiple turns, especially if they're able to contribute in numbers. So if your Banshees are there in large numbers, they actually will, and this is my experience here, they tend to survive quite well. I don't know why, because they're only strength 3. I think it's because they've got a high initiative, they've got a high number of power attacks. So it tends to flush out the opponents as fast as they're having to receive the wounds. So they tend to do quite well. Not always. There are exceptions, you know, against Terminators and stuff. But broadly, they do quite well. So don't underestimate that they'll probably have a couple of turns in combat against a meaty unit about their own size, and they'll win. And they can go to the next one. And if you can get them into the back lines, they're actually pretty nasty. So you've got an absolutely awesome opportunity with Dark Eldar that's so good. You could get 3 raiders. You could go 2 with Banshees and 1 with Wraithblades, and I wouldn't have a problem with anybody doing that. I really wouldn't. I think they are that good. You know, if you wanted to go all out, just all out assault, just to shake it up as Eldar, it's actually one of your better choices. I know a lot of people will take Striking Scorpions, and I've got loads of time for Striking Scorpions in Crandarus, and also these actually do synergize very well with Striking Scorpions, especially if you take Crandarus, because he's such a beast. But I do think, and we'll do a video on Jane Czar, but I do think Jane Czar is probably, if I just put it in the camera shot here for you, I think she's probably the best Phoenix Lord because of her buffs and the fact that she gives speed to whatever she deals with, and she's got a lot of attacks at sort of mainly strength 4, but she's got a lot, so she does quite a lot of damage. She's also got this shout. I haven't gone on about the shout, but it's actually very good. It lowers the opponent's, because she's not really part of it, but I'll even though it's build 1 that it belongs in, I will bring it up. She gives you a leadership buff. Sorry, not only just a leadership buff and fearless to the squad, but she also projects a bubble which causes, without a fear test, which the Exarch normally has, but you have to take a fear test. It's called War Shout. So with a fear test fail, then they drop their initiative. Well, drop their attacks. Well, she does the same, but she doesn't need to take the test. So she's quite good on that front. To bring that in wrong, but that belonged in the build one explanation, but I forgot to include it there. So you've got a lot of skilled stuff here. Acrobat, War Shout, like I just mentioned. You've got the power weapons. You've got the run. They're a good unit in this context if you put them in a raider. So in a raider, I would actually give them a C+, maybe even a B-, so it's 3.5 out of 5. They become, I would say, if you're serious about you taking Banshee model in the 7th, it's the only way to go, is to ally with Dark Eldar and take any sort of joy out of taking them. So, right, final build then. Now, this is the bonus build 3, so I'm just going to really quickly run through it. It's actually pretty naff. I'm not going to lie to you, it's not very good, but it does give you one thing in terms of an edge, and I'll tell you what it is. You take 5 in a squad, that's it. You take 85 points. You think in terms of low point games, these can actually be quite good because they're so small in points numbers. You might even take 2 squads. So I want you to get away from this fact that you might be in an 1850 point game, and I start to think in the 500 point points cost, and they're actually quite useful because of their enormous speed and the fact that they have quite a lot of attacks, and that they have the ability to suppress Overwatch. So in very small games, like small board games that you can have versions of 40k, they actually do have a niche. If you're not in that kind of game and you're in like a 2,000 plus or 1,500 point game, they're still not expensive. I mean, what you're looking at there is 85 points times 2. It's not expensive. You know, it's 170 points of Eldar, but important to bear in mind is whatever you do, these become active in this strategy of bonus builds, taking a small min squad. You're looking to activate them as late in the game as possible. So you want these girls to be completely hidden, uninvolved, uninterested until perhaps turn 4, maybe turn 3 if you've had the second turn. And you're doing that to ensure that they can take on dead and dying squads. They can kick things off objectives. They're relatively cheap to do it. Against 2 or 3 Marines, they're going to murder them. If they can reach them, they're going to murder them. And there's nothing the Marines can do about it because they haven't got the Overwatch. And they've got the speed to do it. If you take a Wraith host, a battle host formation, Wind Rider formation, for example, or a Guardian battle host, and you've got a 6-inch run and a 6-inch move and a 3-inch bonus to the run, then 15 inches is a great thing. Plus, they get the 3 inches of the charge. So they are really, really handy, really handy. But you've got to decide in your head to penalise yourself point wise. So there are 2 ways that you take this. Just to be clear, you either go in a very low points game and kind of just use them and use cover and just move them and try to use their speed. And obviously, you don't want them on their own because they're going to get slaughtered. But in those games where you play corridors down building, I forget the name of the game, but people play it and you get 500 points and you put them in a tiny little box and you move them around a bit like a board, and it's all corridors and stuff. In those kind of games, they're actually really good because you can deny line of sight and get quite close to the opponents, and then they will actually be effective. Then the other way you do it is that you put them in a larger points game and you just hide them, physically remove them from the targeting list of the enemies. They're cheap enough to kind of get away with that, and especially against drop podding armies or armies that I'm trying to explain, but a bit more spread out, for example, and not so mobile. But they've got your objectives and you need to get them off. Maybe Necrons, they're actually really good. So, but you've got to be thinking in terms of an enemy that's kind of on its knees and you're trying to steal a win. Are they the best choice at that? No, jet bikes are better, but it's better than nothing. And if you've got the models and you want to use them, then there is a valid way of using them. I would say that, in all honesty, it's a D minus. It's not a strong build. I think in a 500 or 350 point game, actually, it's not that bad. And I would give it maybe even a B if you're in very small point games, depending on the type of game that you're playing. Because they actually are pretty good for low point games, because they've got power weapons and they ignore Overwatch, and they can use their speed potentially because the board is small. So yeah, for all those reasons, they're actually quite good. But in general, running around at the end of the game, securing objectives and hitting people who are holding objectives and just digging them out, they're actually pretty good at that. And but is it the greatest use of your points? No. Are they as good as jet bikes? No. Jet bikes are better at it because their objectives secured and they got a ton of shots and they can move further. So really, it's a bit of a stretch, but I do think it can be done, and I think you are, as long as you're careful with them in this setup, then I think you will probably not regret taking them if you know when to strike and you're prepared to be patient. You can also mix them up with things like race lights, jet bikes, and still not feel that bad. If you took a couple of squads of these and a couple of squads of scat bikes, you're not actually beasting people that badly. It's not that cruel, and it's still fairly friendly, and you can kind of do quite more than maybe the opponent might think. But anyway, that's all there is to say about that. Now it's time for the conclusion. So, in conclusion then, the simple answer is they have such overwhelming weaknesses. If you can get them into combat with a transport choice, if you can somehow mitigate their survivability with a buff, if you can somehow mitigate their lack of strength, they can become an incredibly good unit. If you imagine a squad of 10 of these in a raider with, it wouldn't be 10 if you had James R, but let's say, or if you had a character, but let's say 10 for the sake of me finishing the sentence, and you put a demonic sanctity buffing psyker in there, even maybe Eldrad, and you give them invisibility as well, and you give them hammer hand, they suddenly become one of the nastiest things in 40k to have to face. Only Terminators probably wouldn't be scared of them. Even giant monsters and creatures. That's something that I didn't go into because it's hard to get into combat with a giant monstrous creature that doesn't want to be in combat with you. But actually, they're not too bad against giant monstrous creatures, especially Tau, because they tend to have a lot of guns. So not being able to Overwatch. I mean, they're a massive, massive anti-Tau, because the strength 3 doesn't matter so much. They ignore armor up to 3, so that's pretty good because quite a lot of specialist Tau units have that. Against giant monstrous creatures, you toughness 6, I think, is the most you can hurt. So you got to be careful. But there are some toughness 6 giant monstrous creatures out there with loads of wounds that, for example, Tyranids have, and you can really do damage on them because they're AP 3, and maybe they've got a 3-up armor save. So they're a mixed bag, and you have. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say is that there's little gaps of daylight here in an overall gloomy picture, and that's why I don't really think they're that good, because you've got this problem with, well, if I do this and I can widen that little gap of daylight, I might be able to use that tactically. And over here there's a gap of daylight because they've got power weapons, and over here's a gap of daylight because they ignore Overwatch, and over here's a gap of daylight because they run so fast. And if I can try to get those 3 gaps of daylight to sort of meet on a target and not lose them in the process, they're going to do great, and they are going to do great. But it's so contingent on the opponent really just being a bit absent, and any opponent that really knows how to not even fight, but just knows he's going to kill 10 strength toughness 3 models, and he's going to hurt you by taking off the board, and you can wipe a squad out like that. He's going to take the opportunity to wipe a squad out like that. So overall, they're not quite the worst aspect in the game, but I just think There's more options with other things. But it's a shame because I think they have in the 7th edition tried really hard to give them a role, but the lack of an assault transport. You know, if they could take a Venom, for example, in 6, I would have them in a heartbeat. You know, and so it's that's the problem. And you know, when I even bought the Doom of Mimera Codex book, the new one, Imperial Armor, looking, and I was trying to look in the Corsairs list for a way of taking a Venom so they could go in it. You know, and you shouldn't be doing that. You know, you shouldn't be struggling to say, oh, I'll take a Venom, and it'll be the Corsairs Venom, and it's an ally, and I can put them in it, because I don't feel too bad about allying with Corsairs. But you can't even do it, because they're only available as dedicated transports. I looked at the Harlequin Codex, like, is there any way of getting that Harlequin transport, which is basically like an upgunned, bigger version of, I forget, it's a Star Weaver or something. And I was like, oh, we'll get that, and we'll ally with Harlequins, and we'll put... You can't. There's no formation that gives you them. You can only take them as dedicated transports. And it's like, well, there is a formation. You get, I think, 1. And it's like you have to take 2 troops with an E. And it's just way too expensive. And it's just such a heartbreak, because if they could get a little bit of daylight on the assault transport without... And Dark Eldar will do it for you. They will. No one else can. And that's the problem with them. The next best thing is to just treat her as a tank, and depending on what gets shot at them, try and get away with it. But that is basically all she wrote on the Banshees, you know. Anyway, so just to close the video off, if you like the video, please give it a like. It really does make a difference. If you like the channel, please give us a subscribe down at the bottom. But also, I'm going to add, if we're no longer in 7th edition, then look carefully in the description below, because I'll place a link to, for example, the 8th edition, which hasn't come out yet, and I don't have a clue when it will, but it may do. And I will do an addendum. I may even do the video again. So hopefully this video won't just age, you know, and obviously I can't predict the future. So as this video moves through time, this video, when it's a year old, become less important. So what I'm going to try and do is do addendums and modifiers as well to it. So make sure that even if this video is a couple of years late, and this is no longer 2016, it's now 2018 or something, but just look in the description below, because you might see a link to something that might take you further, especially if you've turned off annotations in YouTube like I always do. Anyway, I hope you're well, and thanks for watching.